Welcome, everyone. Appreciate you all joining us today. We are going to discuss the High-Speed Nevada Phase 3 BEAD requirements. And I'm pleased that everybody's here and can join us for today's webinar. As a reminder, this webinar is being recorded so that we can post it to the OSIT website and YouTube channel later. And we will also post the slides for this webinar in the coming days on the website. So you will have access to both the recording and the slides here in the coming days. The goal of the High-Speed Nevada initiative is to ensure that all Nevadans, regardless of where they live, have access to high-speed internet that's affordable, reliable, and scalable. This is a big step for us. Previously, we have invested over $250 million in middle mile infrastructure that will position us and position all of you to better and more easily serve last mile customers. The purpose of today's webinar is to take another deep dive into one of the important categories or one of the important topics around our last mile program, which is Phase 3. So in the last mile program previously, we've discussed a number of important topics, and ultimately the goal of the last mile program is to connect over 52,000 locations today that are either unserved or underserved, including community anchor institutions. So welcome. Go to the next slide, please. Oops. There we go. All right. So today is a webinar. This is webinar. This is actually webinar number 2, not number 3, but it's this is the BEAD grant requirements webinar. But we all want you to come back after lunch to the BEAD technical requirements webinar that we'll have later today. So that one tackles a little bit of a different aspect of this, and we'll take a deep dive into technical requirements. Next week, we'll also discuss the program design, as well as taking a deep dive into the scoring rubrics, so all of you understand how we'll be evaluating applications. With that, I will go ahead and turn things over to my colleague, Amy, who will walk you through the BEAD grant requirements. And then at the end, at the end of this, we will stop the recording and then take questions, any questions that come in. So with that, Amy, go ahead and take it away.
Thank you, Brian. I was worried for a second there that I had the wrong webinar up, but I do have the right webinar up. So thank you all, and thank you for joining us. Again, we're going to talk about the BEAD requirements. And for those of you who are familiar with the BEAD Notice of Funding Opportunity and the state's initial proposal, Volume 2, you know that there are numerous requirements. So the state is looking to make this as easy as possible, but know that most of these requirements do come down through those federal requirements in the BEAD Notice of Funding Opportunity, or the BEAD NOFO. So today I'm going to do a brief overview of what's required for subgrantee qualifications, dive into some of those qualifications in more detail, and then take questions at the end. So subgrantee qualifications include financial capability that were addressed in a previous webinar. They include organizational, managerial, and technical capabilities, and the technical webinar will be later today, and as well as numerous federal and workforce legal requirements and other compliance and reporting requirements that include a number of issues. Oh. And if we can go on mute, that would be great. So first, let's start with organizational and managerial capabilities. So these include detailed requirements include providing an organizational chart that includes your personnel teams and structure, providing resumes of all of the key personnel that are going to be working on your project or projects that include, again, managerial, technical, operational positions that are key to making sure that you complete the project and ultimately get that broadband benefit out to the communities within Nevada. Ownership information. This comes again directly from the BEAD Notice of Funding Opportunity and is similar. Information is part of the information that is included with any FCC RDOF applications. So for those of you who have applied for those awards, you might be familiar with the structure, but it is very detailed about including 10% or more ownership. And there are a number of questions, and there will be a template that makes that a little bit easier to respond to. Any certifications and licenses that are held by the business and any of your key personnel. And there's no set answer there. It's really, this is a requirement again, to get a sense of that you know how to operate, or your key personnel know how to build and operate a broadband network. And then there are a number of certifications throughout the applications of acknowledgement with various requirements that you have the technical qualifications, that you have the experience to run these awards. For new entrants to telecommunications and broadband, really you need to provide similar or substantially similar information. So evidence to demonstrate, again, that you've obtained experience through either newly hired key personnel or contractors in order to show that you have sufficient operational capacity and managerial capacity and technical capacity to run these awards. Another requirement for this is information about past performance on broadband projects, and you must provide information about any experience, include up to 3 projects. You can include more if you'd like, especially those that are similar in scope and size that you're anticipating applying for or that you are applying for, and then other public funding. And that really is as extensive as it sounds. If you're applying in multiple states, it includes all states. This is a requirement directly from the BEAD NOFO. It's fairly straightforward that it includes, as you can see, ARPA, RDOF, CAF, CARES. These are all the fun acronyms. Middle mile grants, just any number of these programs or state programs that you have funding for or that you're anticipating applying for through BEAD, please include those. This will ultimately just help the state look at an initial risk assessment, but it is also just a required piece of information that the government has indicated that it would like to see the states collect as part of this process. There's specific information about each of these awards that we are required to collect, and that will be included in a template. You can see that it's a range of project technology areas, amounts of funding, match, etc. So the next set of information has to do with the fair labor practices and workforce expectations on the award or the certifications that are generally required. So again, there will be information, and there will be some more information in the webinar that goes through the scoring part of the award about what's expected with respect to past and future compliance on labor laws. There will, if you have any non-compliance that was marked, there will be an opportunity to explain what that was about and how the organization cured that non-compliance. what policies and procedures the organization has put in place to ensure that there's future compliance with labor laws, and then certifications regarding compliance with civil rights and non-discrimination laws, non-discrimination related to fair labor practices again, and then prohibition on the use of grants to fund either support or opposition to collective bargaining. So for workplace safety, again, this is part of technical capacity, making sure that you understand what broadband workplace safety entails. And obviously that's going to depend on the types of technologies that you're offering, but what procedures and processes and trainings do you have in place to comply with OSHA and other labor standards to make sure that you have a safe workplace for your employees? So there's a detailed explanation and some certifications that you will have a safe workplace for employees. We also want to make sure that you have an appropriately skilled workforce. And so we'll collect information about the types of jobs that you have, the credentialing that you might require, licensing that you might require. Again, there's no set answer here. We're really looking for what is generally industry standard and that you know your business. Also information about your ability to recruit, train, engineering, design, and construction folks that are supporting the network. Obviously, there will be a big crunch on the marketplace to making sure that everyone is thinking about that and that they have a plan in place to ensure that they have sufficient labor to get these projects built. And then a commitment and a plan for hiring Nevada-based personnel. That is fairly self-explanatory. Another thing that is passed down is really information about pathways to higher wages and higher skilled positions, and how any apprenticeship program that the company participates in, and whether that includes outreach to non-traditional workers, and career paths that are available and or company funded training. We're looking to ensure that there's a diverse pipeline of skilled workers in Nevada. So please provide as robust of an explanation as you think would be helpful for the state to understand your thinking around your hiring and retention practices. And then just, again, a requirement of the BEAD NOFO is ensuring that there are inclusive hiring practices. So it won't surprise you to see that both here, just being aware of these requirements, certifying that if you have any of your own public procurements, that you make sure that you're making outreach to appropriately qualified minority-owned, women-owned businesses and labor surplus area businesses. There will also be, as you'll see later, reporting requirements around these issues. So I want to go into a little more depth on compliance and reporting because, as you've seen already, there are quite a number of requirements that come from the federal government. There are more in the remaining compliance part of this, including Build America, Buy America. So we'll start here because this is fairly complicated and there's quite a number of resources that will be ultimately linked to this presentation that the federal government has put out. But as part of the statute that created BEAD, the Infrastructure and Jobs Act, there was a Build America, Buy America requirement for equipment. And so you can see this general requirement is that all iron and steel manufactured projects, including but not limited to fiber optic facilities and construction materials, must be produced in the US unless there's a waiver that was granted. There's quite a number of rules around this, and there was a waiver that the U.S. Department of Commerce put out specifically for BEAD on this issue. I'm going to go back and talk about this a little bit more. That waiver is really worth spending some time on as you think about your equipment. And so one thing that I do want to mention here is the waiver was a limited waiver, and it was not for all electronics. There are some optronics that get picked up in the BABA requirement, and you are starting to see some major manufacturers actually produce what is certification around their compliance with the BABA requirements. And NTIA is going to be hosting on its website those equipment manufacturers and specifications around that equipment, what is considered BABA compliant. There's a self-certification that's required for manufacturers that I'll go into in a bit. But there will be detailed information about what equipment is or is not on that list. And it's really important especially if you're a fiber provider, to pay attention to what that list includes. And there will be additional information that I'll go through when we go through reporting about what's going to be required to be collected around this. So again, it's just really, I think it's critical to understand what is and what is not in that list, and start thinking about how that might impact the price of the price for your equipment, and how that might impact the application that you submit and the pricing around that application. It is likely to increase your cost, and so please be thinking about that. Okay. Cybersecurity and supply chain requirements. There are certifications around the fact that you have or will have a compliant cybersecurity risk management framework in place, and a supply chain risk management plan in place. There are a lot of resources on the NIST website. It is the Cybersecurity Risk Management Framework 2.0 now. The BEAD NOFO referenced an earlier version, but the most up-to-date version is 2.0. And there are a lot of resources for small businesses and other entities on the NIST website. If you do not have a plan in place now, but are planning to put one in place, I highly recommend that you take a look. A number of associations also have information about this on their websites, and some guidance for communications companies. So it may be worth taking a look at what the resources are around you if you do not already have such a plan in place. Unsurprisingly, the BEAD NOFO and the initial proposal volume 2 have a number of service obligations in place. These include information around how you will reach out to the communities that you are serving to make sure that they know about your network. In short, it's what's your marketing plan for making sure that you're getting people online or on net once you have the services out and available. And I could give you an example. What I just had fiber installed at my house out in the front, and they started by going door to door, and then there were notices. So just it's something like that, so that so that we know what your plan is in terms of making sure that you're getting people online. What are your affordability and low cost plans? And so there are requirements. Again, there were requirements that were put on the state about providing a low cost option and ensuring that that any subgrantees ultimately agree to comply with the ACP, which was a low-cost offering that expired earlier this year, or its successor programs. This is a requirement from the federal government, from all the federal programs that are incorporated under this announcement. So just know that any successor program will be picked up. And so folks need to know that they have eligible providers to go to. The low cost option itself, you must meet the speed requirements. The minimum surge speed requirements for BEAD, for example, of 100 megabits down and 20 megabits per second up. The performance benchmarks that are required by the FCC, the minimum latency requirements of 100 milliseconds, and then a reference price of $50 per month, inclusive of all taxes and fees, or $75 on tribal lands. Also, the plan cannot be subject to data caps or surcharges, throttling, etc. I also wanted to note there is a requirement for tribal engagement and ultimately for a resolution if the project is selected for a provisional award. So that is something, if you are considering building on tribal lands, please make sure that you're having that outreach now, and that you provide some evidence that you are working with the tribe as part of your application. And then ultimately, if awarded, work towards a binding resolution before those awards are finalized. Unlike round one awards, there are also environmental and historic preservation requirements that exist on these awards. And so the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA, and the National Historic Preservation Act, or the NHPA, are part of this award. And once you have a provisional award, there may be more information that will be required in order to do an initial review of the project that needs to go in with the final proposal that goes to NTIA with the awards that ultimately are selected. Think about, as you're initially looking at your application, think about designing your projects to minimize that potential for adverse impacts on the environment. NTIA has a number of resources on its website in terms of mitigation practices for environmental awards that from past broadband projects. Again, there may be additional information that's required. The state will do an initial review and make some recommendations as part of its final proposal, but ultimately NTIA remains the final word on NEPA and NH and this review. So just please know that those requirements are there. Start thinking about hiring an expert to help guide you through the process. It's really maybe it may be more than one expert. You may have a NEPA and a historic preservation expert, but think about getting those folks lined up for when you have an award. I'm going to move now into subgrantee reporting requirements, and it won't surprise you that most of these have also come through the BEAD requirements from the federal government. These are the list of requirements that they've set forth in their initial guidance. I do expect to see this supplemented through additional guidance from the federal government. We will, where we can, we will try to make this as straightforward and as easy as possible. There certainly, with the tools that are being set up, there will be ways to, hopefully make this easier through some of the automated tools that are being created. So at least the requirement is that these reports come in at least semi-annually for the duration of the subgrant. Again, to track the awards, just to make sure that they're being built, and that these benefits, these taxpayer funded benefits, are getting out to folks in the state, who will ultimately have broadband access. Again, these reports are they're submitted to OSID, but they ultimately could be available to NTIA upon request. So please be aware of that as well. The state has reporting semi-annually as well for its BEAD grants, and it's part of, as the grantee and not the sub-grantee, the state has its reporting. Any reporting of the subgrants or your reporting will get rolled up into the state's report. So there's a reason why some of this information will look very similar to what the state is ultimately reporting as well. So I don't, these are fairly straightforward categories, but and some of it won't change, like a description of your project and your project type will remain the same throughout the project. The service locations that are being served will get picked up in each semi-annual report. So that's the same list of total locations that you've agreed to, but then any new locations that you're finding as your provisioning service that are off the map, and as they're coming online, those will get added as well. Need to understand the types of locations that can come from that will come as a part of this. So whether you're picking up a residential or commercial or community anchor institution, likely that's going to be limited in your award, and you'll know exactly what that looks like. And then obviously the technology and the technology type and the speeds that are available, the maximum advertised speed, and then the peak and off-peak actual speeds that you would run from your network gateway. Information about pricing, and then information about interconnection agreements that were requested and their current status. Contracts, and then this is what ties into what I mentioned earlier about minority-owned businesses, women business enterprises, any labor surplus areas, information about those specific businesses as well, and whether they fit any of those criteria. That is something that NTIA is interested in collecting. Mapping, there'll be some information required about mapping. Something that seems quite obvious is that your semi-annual report will also include a financial report. And that's going to look very similar to your project budget that you will include as part of the application. It will have the same categories. That will be something that you'll hear about later, so I won't go into that in more depth, but those categories are fairly general, and that SF 425 is actually it's a standard form, so it's easily findable on the internet, and it's the construction version of the form. Other reporting would include other reporting that NTI decides is relevant. In addition, for projects at $5 million or over, and that's based on total cost, so that would include match. Certifications that any of the laborers or contractors working on the projects are paid at least prevailing wages, as determined by the Secretary of Labor in accordance with Davis-Bacon. So ultimately, if you are not going to provide a Davis-Bacon certification, and that comes with additional Davis-Bacon reporting, then the subgrantee must provide a project employment and local impact report, which I'll go into in the next slide. And then there's also a certification that's required that the project will either use a unionized project workforce or include a project labor agreement, meaning a pre-hire bargaining agreement that's consistent with the National Labor Relations Act. If if such the certification is not provided, then the subgrantee must provide a project workforce continuity plan. I understand that many of the folks on this call are probably familiar with some of this reporting, and once some of these reports are set up, they are very similar from report to report. So it's that initial setup that takes a little bit more time. So project employment and local impact report requirements also include the number of contractors and subcontractors that are working on the project, the number of workers on the projects hired directly and indirectly, and then the wages and benefits, and then whether or not those are less than prevailing wage. So again, once you have that fully set up, once you know who all of your contractors are and you can set that up, that report can remain very similar from reporting period to reporting period. And then a workforce continuity plan is a little bit more in depth, but it's really just making sure that you have taken steps to provide a supply of appropriately skilled labor. You've described any of the required professional certifications. You minimize the risk of labor disputes, provide a safe workforce. This is very similar to a lot of the questions in the application, so I don't think they're going to surprise you. Name any subcontract entity performing on the project, and then just understand what that folks are receiving wages that are sufficient to secure an appropriately skilled workforce. And that is really obviously going to depend on the position and the skills that are required for each of those positions. And as I mentioned earlier, there's also the Build America, Buy America, or the BABA reporting requirements that include certifications from manufacturers. So you probably want to maintain a certification letter on file from any of your manufacturers that they are that they either are providing BABA compliant equipment for those equipment that need to be BABA compliant, like again, your fiber optic cable for one needs to be BABA compliant. And then you also will have reporting requirements as well. There is a compliance and self-certification page on NTI's website that goes into more depth on what those requirements are. But for waived equipment, so anything that is not required to be Buy American, there will be specific information that NTI has requested from subgrantees about those pieces of equipment. That will, and hopefully you can tie that into information that you're already collecting as part of your regular inventories that will hopefully make that easier to fill out on a regular basis. Again, manufacturers are expected to self-certify. It's voluntary, and there is an approved waiver that's on the Department of Commerce's webpage that allows some of the manufacturers to get ahead of this and start providing that information. There will, again, be approved waivers that are published there as well. Now, while there's reporting the entire time during your subgrant, there will also be a report at the end, because the state has a report at the end that it needs to provide to wrap up the funding with the federal government, say that it met its requirements through all of the potential subgrantees that are on this call and other subgrantees that it has, but that final list of subgrantees. So all of the information that NTI will require of the state will again get flowed down. It's likely to be very similar to what the semi-annual reports look like, with a couple other pieces of information. So that closeout report will show the state at the end that you've finished the work and that you have provided your final filings that show the federal interest, and then your report can serve as sort of the last touch. When that's accepted, then you would get your final payment. That report would be incorporated into the state's report up to the federal government. Again, I fully expect to see some additional requirements come through, but that is to be determined. We will see what NTIA requires as part of that. I did not talk about the federal interest. That is a requirement of the award. And as someone that used to be a bit on the other side of this, the federal interest is not meant to be scary, but what it is really just, it's an interest that the federal government holds to kind of make sure that the benefits of the taxpayer funding do what they're supposed to do, which means these networks are being built and ultimately you're serving people and providing broadband out to your communities. So that's what it's meant to do. It's a 10-year period that those interest filings need to stay in existence, and that is it is just part of the federal award to make sure it's not a debt, it doesn't serve as a debt, it's not a lien. It really is just to make sure that folks know that this was publicly funded and that those benefits stay in existence. Again, and when you have submitted all of your closeout requirements, then you will be done with those requirements and you can go about your business, which is kind of exciting. And with that, I'll talk a little bit about what those requirements entail. It won't surprise you that it's going to be, ultimately a wrap up of what those, what you spent your money on, what services you're now providing, the locations that you're providing them at, and those reports all need to be aggregated up into the state's report and then ultimately certified that the state met its obligations. And with that, I am available for questions as appropriate, Brian.
Hey, thanks so much, Amy, for walking through those slides and all those details with regard to the program. Just a couple of things that I kind of wanted to emphasize before we open it up for questions for everyone. So, number one, one of the things that we want to do with this grant and with this program is make both the application process as easy as possible for you, and then also make the post-award process as easy as possible. With the federal money, we know that there's going to be reporting obligations for us, and that we're required to populate our reports with information from you. And we want to make this as easy as possible so that you can do what you do best, which is constructing networks and connecting people to high-speed internet. So just want to let you know that we have planned here at OSIT a couple of different things that we hope will make that easy for you. Number one, we have both an application portal as well as a reporting portal that you will use to submit the information that's required by NTIA. And those portals and that information, or those portals will really help make things as easy as possible for you so that you know exactly what you have to do. And it's an easy place for you to simply upload the required information. What I would how I would think about applying is, view the application or the request for applications document from OSIT as a checklist, and start compiling the different pieces of information that Amy talked about. And the application portal will walk you through and make sure that you have the right information in the right format to include in your application. Secondly, I just wanted to make two quick points on tribal and then on some of the labor reporting. And maybe these are, maybe I'm going in, or overemphasizing this, but just wanted to provide some additional context. So there's 1,039 regional project areas that are available for application. 25 of those regional project areas are tribal project areas. And so all of the broadband serviceable locations within those 25 are tribal. So we've basically gathered up the tribal areas and put those into single project areas. And so to Amy's point, the our tribal nations are among some of the most unserved Nevadans, and we want to make sure, or the unserved residents of Nevada, and so we want to make sure that they are served just as well as anybody else. And so we encourage you to have conversations with them about what kind of service you're able to offer, and that if your award is or if your application is awarded, that you'll be able to obtain the required resolution from that NTIA requires. So those tribal regional project areas are marked on the map, and so when you select one, it'll indicate whether or not it's a tribal area. Second thing about the labor reports, just want to emphasize that that the Davis-Bacon and then the reports regarding whether or not the workforce is unionized or has a project labor agreement, there's two options, right? So if you pay Davis-Bacon and use the unionized workforce, it's essentially a check the box and you can move on. If you decide that that's not the route you want to do, then that's where the reporting comes in. And so just wanted to make sure to clarify that it's kind of an either or, and you have the opportunity to choose which one you would like to do. But neither is required. It's not required to go in either direction. So with that, I will stop talking and am happy to open it up for any questions that anybody has.